Oh, I need my iPad. Participants.
Hi, and welcome to everyone to the second webinar of the CISS Alumni's three-part webinar series. Today we'll be focusing on jobs. First, I'm going to do a little housekeeping. The chat function is going to be turned, there will be no chat function today. So if you have any questions for our speakers, please put them in the Q&A tab, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The webinar will also be recorded and put on our CISS Alumni YouTube channel at a later date. So I'm your host for this evening. My name is Claire. I'm a 2015-2016 scholar, and I'm a member of the Glasgow Projects subcommittee. Our speakers this evening are Cloughley, Cameron Smyth, and Natalie Hotchkiss. Without further ado, I'm going to pass you along to Connor, who's going to start us off.
Thanks very much, Claire, for that. And if you don't mind, I'll just share out my screen, so bear with me a couple of seconds while I get that sorted. Can you, oh, I've already ruined it. There we go. Can you see it? Is that all good? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep, you're all good.
Brilliant. So thanks very much for inviting me along to this webinar. The CISS Alumni team is growing every single year with new scholars being added, and I'm about to probably go on a wee bit about my experience with Chinese and other languages, as well as talking about the sort of various jobs I've had. So without further ado, I'll just get straight into it. So a bit about me. I am a CISS scholar of 2014, and we were just talking there before the event started. 2014 feels a very, very long time ago, and I'm always reminded of how old I'm getting, knowing that it was ages ago. It actually feels like, you know, like a couple of years back. It's actually 6. After my time studying in Tianjin, I came back and started studying at the University of Edinburgh. I studied Chinese and Russian for my sins, and I did a 4-year degree there, which involved going abroad and spending half my time in Russia and half my time in China for that year. And I'm now working as a business development manager at a company called Abashi, which is based in Scotland. So I'm going to start, and I know it's a wee bit cliche, but I'm going to start with a quote that's kind of stuck with me ever since high school. And that's, if I'm selling to you, I speak your language. If I'm buying, dann müssen Sie Deutsch sprechen. And for those of you who are German speakers, or to be honest, you'll be able to piece it together. The second half of that is, you must speak German. And I suppose that's one of the main drivers behind learning a language. People feel important when you speak to them in their own language. For example, I remember, you know, even 6 months into living in Tianjin, I would still get this like incredible reaction just by saying ni hao, which is hello, to, you know, passers-by in the street, and they would be absolutely gobsmacked. They were like, you know, I would say hello, and they would compliment me. They'd be, oh, your Chinese is so good. And it's like, I really just said hello. There's not really that much to it. But I think that kind of drives home the point that people like being spoken to in their own language. So I would say from that perspective, I'd like to address probably a couple of misconceptions about language learning in general. And I think there is this sort of common theme that if you want to learn a language, then, you know, you better make it to, you know, native level fluency. And to me, I think that needs challenged, because it's just not true. You know, you can gain so much cultural insight and even just sort of like friendliness and communication with other people just by learning the sort of bare minimum. And I always try and make it a challenge for, you know, for example, when I'm going on holiday, I always try and, you know my pleases, and I know my thank yous, and I know how to ask questions and stuff like that. It's just, it gives that certain level of depth to, you know, what you're doing and you're traveling and all the rest of it. So this quote in particular, like, speaks to me quite a lot on what you can do with a language. So I've got a couple of benefits of language learning. I'll speak to some of these points here, because I know I'm going to be talking about jobs very shortly. But the sort of benefits I found when traveling and learning a language, and the first one there is you become much more independent. And like when I first went on the sort of Tianjin scholarship, I left Scotland at the sweet age of 17. I was really young, and I'd never lived abroad for any sort of extended period of time. And I suppose my return journey actually speaks to how much I'd grown as a person, and how much more independent I'd become. Because throughout my time in China, and a lot of the scholars, we go travelling. So we're booking hotels, and we're making sure we get flights, and going on the high-speed rail, and all of the sort of admin parts of traveling that when you're a lot younger you're not really exposed to, because you're sometimes just traveling with the family. So how did I get home from China? Well, it's kind of a funny story, but I'd met a friend in Tianjin, Waigo Yudashu, the foreign studies university that we were living in. She was Russian, her name's Nadia, and I became good pals with her because I knew I was going to go and study Chinese and Russian at Edinburgh after my year was done. So we became really good friends, and I was talking to her one day, and she said, it'd be really cool if you could like visit Russia on your way back. And I was like, yeah, that's not a bad idea at all. So some of you might have heard of it, but there's a train that you can take called the Trans-Siberian Railway, and there's various routes, but the route that I ended up taking was I went from Beijing across the Gobi Desert and up through Mongolia to reach in Russia. There's a place called Lake Baikal where Nadia and her family lived. So I took that journey, and that was interesting, seeing like the sort of west side of China that you don't normally get to see, because obviously a lot of the cities are on the east. And I had a really good week and with Nadia and her family, and they showed me about, and they took me to temples, Buddhist temples, and all the rest of it. And then so the Trans-Siberian only comes every so often. So because I'd spent a week, I actually had to book a different train, a Russian domestic train, to get from Ulan-Ude, which is Nadia's hometown, all the way through to Moscow. And it was like a 4-day journey. And of course, I was young, I was booking online, and the train arrived. The train pulls in, and all these Russian soldiers get off the train. And it turns out it was actually a Russian military transport train, and all these soldiers had been serving in Vladivostok, doing their training. And I got in this carriage, young Scots guy with barely any Russian. Like I hadn't even started studying it properly yet. Taking his life. I had like a suitcase, I had a rucksack on my back and one on my front, and it was a carriage of 59 Russian soldiers and myself. And one of the really interesting things, it turned out I was actually sat opposite a guy who he didn't like how the Russian version of Avengers had been dubbed over in Russian. So he decided to learn English, and he was the person I communicated with for the 4 days, and he helped introduce me to lots of different people. And one of the things I always remember is I'd sort of stocked up on supplies for this 4-day journey, and I ended up trading some bread with like one of my, I think it was like a Russian sniper or something like that, and he ended up giving me his sort of army mug, the sort of telescopic mugs that you get in the field. And that's something that if you told me that I would have been doing that when I first went to China, I would have laughed in your face. So there's lots of different language stories like that can get really interesting. Speaking to the second point, I did a wee bit of research. There's a constant debate in Scotland in particular around Scottish Gaelic, right, and Gaelic road signs and stuff like that. So I started looking at the benefits of learning a language, from your home country. I'm not a native Gaelic speaker or anything like that, but I wanted to kind of put myself to the test. to see if I could like justify why I think Gaelic should be taught a wee bit more widely. And I think one of the key things there is that by learning another language, you actually enhance your ability to learn other languages. You know, if you start learning a language from a younger age, then your brain actually changes the way it works to the point where you're able to make connections a lot faster. And there's a whole bunch of neuroscience research that's gone into this, to the point where if you learn a second language, your language actually grows in size and weighs more, which is quite interesting to say the least. Of course, though, when you go to China in the first instance, I didn't go to China with any Chinese skills at all. So I became an absolute master at learning body language, because you've kind of got to until you've got the vocabulary to do it. So it ends up with like a lot of gesturing in shops and stuff like that. But eventually you get the hang of it. But the sort of body language skills that you pick up, which is just another language at the end of the day, you know, continues well beyond, you know, once you've got a hold of the language. I think it's fairly easy to see, you know, you pick up some really good problem solving skills. You know, you get, you know, you're able to very quickly, and again, this is about, you know, how your brain actually works. The more sort of multitasking you do, because you're doing translation and you're translating in your head, and they always say that, you know that you're really getting there with a language when you start to dream in it. So I think, you know, there's a lot that factors in there, but you know, as you learn a language, you're actually improving, one, how you problem solve, you become better at making decisions faster, and your ability to multitask improves a lot. I suppose that the fifth point there, you know, it speaks to, because you are ingrained and you're learning a language and you're learning how the world is perceived through that language as well. And I think everyone on the call who's been to China can speak to how, you know, your sort of perspective of the world changes as you learn languages. And the same goes for sort of anywhere. You know, it doesn't matter if you're, you know, studying French or studying Spanish or studying German or Chinese or Russian. You know, the way that you look at, you know, world events completely changes. And the second one, you'll be more attractive in the job market. Apparently, there is research that proves that you'll be more attractive to people as well. I am yet to see the results of any of that. However, I can speak a wee bit about the job market stuff, and I'll just move on to that just now. So I suppose one of the things I remember saying at the start of my interview for the scholarship actually, was I knew that learning a language and going and living in China was going to be a launch pad for my future career. And to be honest, I actually think that this, you know, for my short time that I've been working, I think this is quite evident. So I'll just sort of start speaking. I'll start with the bottom left there. During my time in Tianjin, I worked for a college, Green's Tutorial College, which is like tied in with Oxford. And teaching English as a foreign language is a massive industry in itself. And a lot of the time it's paid particularly well. And there's also some great advantages, because when you are going and you're teaching, chances are you're teaching it in the country that you're learning the language of. So not only do you get to work and gain experience, but you're also in a place where you can start, you know, you can practice your language skills more. So it's a great way to do that immediately after. I suppose there's quite a funny cultural story. I remember one time when I was going to work at Green's Tutorial College in Tianjin, I was at the subway, and it was absolutely, like, the summers in China are roasting. They are absolutely roasting, and I'm the pastiest Scottish guy on the planet. So naturally, I was in shorts, right? And yeah, I'm going somewhere with this story, don't worry. So I remember I was standing on the subway, looking to I was going a couple of stations just to get to work. And I remember seeing these two wee kids running about the platform. They were sort of playing tig and stuff like that. And then they caught sight of me, and they they sort of locked on to my legs, which I'm not going to show you just now, but they're slightly hairier than most. And I remember them being quite fascinated by them. And I remember they ran up and they ran over and they started to stroke them. I felt like I was in a bit of a petting zoo, but it was unbelievably embarrassing. Like these two kids that were just like, oh, what's this? So I was kind of panicked. I was frantically looking around, being like, please no one, please the police don't see this. And I remember sort of looking out and I saw that there was like a mum that was sort of shuffling through the crowds, bags full of shopping. And I was like, oh, thank God, I'm going to be rescued. So she came over and put the shopping bags down and joined in with them. It was probably one of the weirder experiences, but it was definitely an insight into the differences in culture. Tianjin, I think at the time, was second or third tier city, so it wasn't used to having a lot of foreigners. So you do become quite a spectacle, which is interesting occasionally. So yeah, moving on. Returning to Scotland, I started studying at University of Edinburgh. I was doing Chinese and Russian, and I needed a job. I needed a part-time job to put myself through uni. So I approached Burberry, that has a shop in Edinburgh, and I applied for a job there and said I could speak Chinese. Now, I think one of the interesting things here is I didn't have any sales experience whatsoever, and I was applying for like a luxury brand, the scarves and the coats and the jackets and all of that sort of stuff. But there's really high demand for bilingual and specifically Chinese speakers, and I think I got that job on the back of my Chinese language skills. And this didn't just help me get the job, but also, obviously, Edinburgh's an extremely popular tourist destination. So, lots of Chinese tour groups visit the capital of Scotland, and they would sort of go around all of the luxury stores. And being able to speak Chinese was great because it gave me an advantage over all my colleagues who couldn't speak Chinese, which, when you're on commission, is really useful, by the way. So there's that element to it as well. I don't think it's any word of a lie. Having an additional language or having more than one additional language increases your value to an employer. You can get paid more just because you know how to speak in a different language, and communication and being able to relate to other people really is key. Next up, me and Natalie, and I'll probably let Natalie talk a wee bit more about it, but me and Natalie were selected to, as part of the connections that we'd made when we were on our scholarship, we were invited to work for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office as visa writers. So, we were both quite young. I think we were both under 20, and we were being invited to, play a role in not just a government department, but an international embassy that we were invited along to work at, which was a really interesting experience. And I will say this as diplomatically as possible. It was quite an interesting day at the office when the Brexit results came through. A fairly mixed reaction, but yeah, that's all I'll say on that one. Returning to Scotland, and I suppose this again speaks to the value of languages to employers. Burberry actually didn't make me resign my role, and I left to go and work for the FCO for maybe about 5-6 months. But upon my return, I was immediately allowed to go back into work because they recognised that Chinese language skills was in such high demand. So they were able to sort of manipulate how I was able to sort of get back into work. I didn't need to reapply. I didn't need to reattend an interview. They had essentially put my job on hold for me, so that I was able to then come back and go back to work. And I was obviously very appreciative for that because I was going into the second year, which then involved, flat payments and, like internet and gas and electric and all the other bills that sort of come with that. After my time at Burberry, I decided that I was I'm more interested in technology. I think the latter jobs kind of speak to that a wee bit more. So I moved from Burberry to Apple, and it was really no difference apart from the thing I was selling. I went from selling scarves and jackets to selling iPhones and laptops. And one of the things that I always like about Apple's selling philosophy is, and I know that sounds really grand, but Apple always ask you to just speak to people. And I know that sounds quite like glib, but the reality is that, look, if someone's going to buy an iPhone or someone's going to buy a MacBook, they're probably going to do it anyway. But the best way to engage with someone is, communicate. And like, again, I can speak to this from a foreign language perspective, but if you're able to speak to someone and have engaging conversations, which is a large part of language learning, you're able to do that. So Apple stores all over the world kind of end up becoming international hubs anyway. So whenever we had Chinese customers coming into the store, I was kind of like front and center. I was almost presented to them as the store's Chinese speaker, because I was the only Chinese speaker in the store. So you actually end up getting sort of thrust into opportunities to use your language skills, which is really interesting. And I loved working for Apple. They're a great company to work for. Also, during my time at Edinburgh Uni, I also internshipped at a group in the top left there called the Asia Scotland Institute. So part of my role there, what the Asia Scotland Institute do is they host speakers from all over the world in Scotland to give lectures on the sort of events of the day, which is really interesting stuff. And I was able to work closely and get an insight into there's lots of commentary to be happened on events that are happening in China and Japan and Korea and Southeast Asia as well, India, and even some of the Middle East. So I was in a digital and data role for that. So I've went from selling to being more involved in the sort of operational, almost relationship management aspect, because I was the one sending emails out to supporters of the Asia Scotland Institute, which they're a non-profit organisation. They're looking for people to become members and stuff like that to promote what's happening. So that was part of the sort of digital and data role. And that again led to my time at Abashi. So I'm not going to do a sales job on you, but just to give you a wee bit of context of what Abashi does. Abashi is a language in itself. It's a common language that people can use to understand how data flows through an organization's people, processes, and technology. So that's how we kind of view it, right? And there's many different sort of facets to the business. For example, we do have a business side. So on the business side, we are looking at platform development. So we have a software platform. So we've got a development team. We're on sales calls. We're doing marketing. We're doing all that sort of stuff. But there's also an education side of the business as well. So we've kind of taken it upon ourselves that the world needs taught about data flow. So how data goes from one place to the other, how it flows through a business, and then it's got lots of repercussions in regards to the likes of data privacy, GDPR. It's got a lot of into like business optimization, cybersecurity, all of that good technical stuff. So what we have on the educational side is we work closely with a company called APMG International. And they're an accredited body that you can get trained in the Abashi methodology. And of course, you can get trained anywhere in the world. So that brings us back into languages. So they've got offices all over the world, and they have partner companies that they engaged with regularly. So the great thing is that we have a Chinese partner. So I've been able to use my language skills within my role at Abashi. I can speak to these Chinese partners and smooth out conversation, between a completely non-English speaking entity and a completely non-Chinese speaking entity. And I kind of act as a sort of bridge between the two. So there's a bit of liaisoning there, which is really great, and it gives me fantastic insight into the Chinese market. And of course, one of the additional things with that is that there's also the trademark and law, for example. So, when you go to, have a trademark in different countries, you can get a UK trademark, you can get a US trademark, and you can get like a sort of EU bundled trademark. But in places like China, you need to go through their trademarking system. So I've been, just because of my language skills, I've been roped into conversations with like Chinese trademark lawyers, which is really cool. And it gives me a lot of insight that I probably wouldn't be invited along to those discussions if I didn't have my language skills to back me up. I'm very aware of time, so I'll try and make this a bit quick. So one of the things, and I was actually doing a tally around the office today, 16 languages are spoken across all of our team members. And like, if that's not just a sort of fantastic, modern world of work, you will encounter people who are bilingual. And sort of referencing my earlier point at the start, people feel good when you speak to them in a language that they, that they understand, that they know from a native level. And for anyone on the call who's maybe thinking, all right, okay, foreign languages, it sits in this bubble. I was talking earlier about how learning languages trains your brain in a certain way. Now, how many programming languages do you think a developer needs to learn? Because it's the same part of the brain, They need to understand. You will very rarely find a developer, a coder, a programmer that knows only one language. So it is a multilingual thing for programming as well. So you might have heard of JavaScript or C++, C#. There's a whole host of languages, but you'll never find a developer that stops at one and says, well, I'm only learning the one language. And I would sort of take that on board and understand that there's no reason at all why you should be just sticking with one language as well. Even like, back as I was saying at the start, you do not need to be a fluent level speaker. You just don't. If you know enough to make sort of the niceties, it can add a lot of value to, sales discussions, marketing discussions, relationship management, all these sorts of things. And I suppose a good testimony to that is funny. I don't actually speak any German whatsoever, and I started the talk with a German quote. But I've actually been speaking to a guy who's quite senior in the German government about Abashi. And even though I don't know any German, I have been trying my absolute hardest to, say the pleasantries in German, signing off an email in German, saying hello in German, saying thank you in German. There's lots of wee things that you can get from just knowing the tiniest wee nuggets of a language that will add, massive value to not just yourself and your career, but also any employer that you work for as well. So I suppose just to wrap up, I would say, language is really just all about connecting people. It's how we communicate, and whether it's sign language or whether it's like a foreign language, or whether it's even if you work on, for example, your like Scots and Gaelic as languages, they actually provide a lot of context, not only historically for your local area, but also changes your perception of quite a few things. And I suppose the last thing is, if you're able to speak to people, you'll never really be without a job. So I'll wrap up there. Thank you very much for that, and I'll shut my face now. I did have another slide actually. There was just a list of like all the other benefits of languages. There's a lot more than 6, by the way. But there you go. So thanks very much, folks.
Thanks very much, Connor. That was great. I'm just going to move on swiftly to Cameron.
Hello, everyone. So I was going to say how are we, but I'm just very used to like business meetings on Zoom. So usually I get people to speak back, but that is all good. Well, thank you very much, Connor, by the way. That was fantastic and really interesting. And there's quite a lot of things that I want to actually echo on what Connor said, moving further into what I'm going to discuss. I'm not quite as fancy as Connor and Natalie. I haven't prepared a slide deck, but I think I can keep you engaged with my beautiful voice. So, without further ado, just to introduce myself, I'm Cameron Smith. Nowadays, most people call me Cam because I live in London. So if I'm like Cameron, some people don't even know how to spell it down here. It's a bit crazy. Anyways, so yeah, I'm a 2014-15 scholar. I went to Strathclyde University. I started off studying international business with modern languages, but I came out with a business degree. I decided to change a few times, but I'll go through the reasons why in a short period of time. And now I currently work for Deloitte, which is a Big Four company. It's a big professional services company. I am a consultant for them, and I do lots of interesting roles because that's what consultants do. We sort of get bought by other companies to come in and work. So I've had experience working with financial service clients. I'm currently on a public sector client, and we get to do like big digital transformation projects because that's what I'm going to do. So just the sort of structure of what I'm going to talk about is just echoing in a few points about learning languages, because one thing I want to say about that is you don't need to study languages at university to love languages. I'll go from personal experience. Then I'll talk maybe a bit about China. I'm sure you've probably heard quite a lot. A bit about uni, a bit about jobs at uni, a bit about internships, but not in much detail because we've already discussed that in prior weeks. And then sort of what working life is like 6 years after being a scholar, which is terrifying. And then just sort of like what my future plans are and what your future plans could look like. So just discussing language. One thing that I really wanted to echo Connor on is learning bits for language is so important. You don't need to be fluent in every language. You don't need to be fluent in 1-2 languages. As long as you can make yourself understood, that is the most important thing. Because even just being able to speak a little bit of a language and making yourself understood, someone is so appreciative of it. One funny story is I had an Italian citizenship interview last week so my background's Italian, like even though it's not in my name, it's my maternal background. We're Italian. And I had an interview at the consulate in London, which is terrifying. It's probably just like Connor's experience in the train with the Russian soldiers. It is a terrifying experience. They ask you all these questions and they don't have any mercy. You speak Italian. So the funny thing was, like, I was making myself understood, but I haven't spoken Italian properly for quite a while. And she said to me at the end, she was like, one of your duties is to improve Italian as an Italian citizen. If you just hold on to a second. Pardon me, sorry. So yeah, essentially, in discussing that, she was at the end, at first she did not like me because she was like, your Italian's really grammatically incorrect and all this sort of stuff. But she's like, at the end, you made yourself understood. So I appreciated that. But she's like, that is your duty now to improve. Also, another point that I wanted to echo with on Connor is learning a language is so important. I now speak what do I speak fluently? I speak English, maybe Italian, sort of Chinese, Java, JavaScript, C++. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, that's coding languages, because coding is very simple. You might not believe it, but coding is very similar to learning a language. It's the same structure. Learning coding words is almost like vocabulary, and then you sort of build them. It's like maybe a bit grammatically more easy, but a bit more mathematically logical. And it's something that's really, really interesting. And it's something that I've had to learn from my career. And one good thing is Connor was talking about languages being something that is a good way of negotiating higher pay. So is being able to app developers, software developers, and all that sort of stuff. So anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move on. Pardon me, sorry. So quickly, I'm just going to talk about China. So I went to China 6 years ago now. I was with Connor and I was with Natalie. and we had quite an interesting year. We learned Chinese, we went traveling. We were 18 years old. We were all a little bit clueless compared to what we are now. And it was definitely a very good experience. And I think it definitely made us a lot more mature, and we learned a lot of really interesting things. But I think we've had quite a lot of talk about China, so I think it would be good if we moved on and spoke more about university. So at university, I worked from anything from working in Tesco to working in Emporio Armani. So I had the little bit of luxury retail, like Connor did at Burberry, and also worked in Tesco in a massive superstore in Glasgow. Now, the craziest thing was I spoke more Chinese at the Tesco in Glasgow than I did working in luxury retail. And it was crazy. Like, I think I came in, and where I worked, people kind of looked at me with a bit of suspicion. They were like, who's this boy, like, who's this student who's came into Tesco and he's like prancing about speaking Chinese left, right and centre. And it actually worked. It was really weird. Like, one time a client came in and she didn't speak a word of English. And the customer service woman, like, bless her, she didn't have much patience. She was just like, I have no clue what she's saying. And luckily I was there to come and speak to her, and we got to the problem. The only problem was whenever there was anybody who didn't speak English, it would be, colleague call, could Cameron Smith please come to the customer service desk? So, I mean, some languages I'd never heard of in my life, we managed. But as I said, as Connor as well said, body language is very important. Signing is very important. And being able to communicate is one of the most important things that you can do as an individual, especially when it comes into work. This is something that will get drilled into you, especially when you start going through university, when you start looking for jobs. It's like making connections and having good communication skills are better than even having the sort of degree itself. Obviously that's important too. So yeah, throughout university, like, that's the sort of thing. I was part of a few societies at uni, and just getting involved, using your Chinese, using your other languages is such an important thing. I think what I'd quite like to sort of discuss to you now is why languages are really, you can still love languages without having studied them at university. So I started off doing my degree in business with Spanish and Italian, and it got to a point where I was speaking Italian in my Spanish classes and speaking Spanish in my Italian classes. I was coming home speaking Italian to my family in a Spanish accent, or speaking Spanish, or vice versa. So it got to a bit mixed up in my head, and I was like, you know what, maybe this isn't for me to do here, but to do on the side. Now, I'd like to emphasize, I've got a lot of Spanish, a lot of Italian friends, and I probably speak fluent Spanish now, but on a conversational level with my friends. My old flatmates are Spanish as well, for example. Like, you can learn languages outside, and as long as you learn bits of languages, that's something that's really, really important. And I think you don't need to have it on paper that you've done it, as long as you can prove it by speaking. That's something that's really important. But nonetheless, if you want to learn language at university, by all means do, because it's so good. And I mean, half of my friends on the panel here are linguists. And it's also great if you want to have the opportunity to study abroad. I unfortunately didn't get that chance because I changed my degree to a business degree that was generic, and I had to apply to study abroad. And unfortunately, I didn't get it because they saw that I'd already had the chance to live in China. So yeah, that's sort of university. I came out of university, I graduated with a first class honours degree. Pardon me 2 seconds. I'm so sorry, pardon me. Then I graduated with first class honours degree, and yeah, I came out of university, and I applied for quite a lot of jobs. I applied for a job with, I'm trying to think, the main one that I wanted was Deloitte, but I applied for a few other big four. And the good thing with consulting is it's quite good if you don't really know what you want to do, it's a really good way of getting into something because you get a lot of experience in different fields. And I think when it was coming to interviews for companies like Deloitte, like these companies are extraordinarily competitive to get into. You're up against the creme de la creme, not only of Scotland, not only of the UK, but people from all over the world who are up against you. And it is really difficult, and you need to think of ways how to differentiate yourself. So obviously being a Scottish person who speaks Chinese really stood out. And it was something that even speaking Chinese, but also the experiences you had from living in China, like problem solving, making yourself understood. Like, I think we've all, when you live in China, there's plenty of things that can go wrong. But that's something that you, with time, build and understand and learn. And it's something that you can use in the competency-based interviews, that's what they're called. Yeah, in a competency-based interview, and that's something you can use as an approach, because a lot of things went wrong in China. Not bad things, but like even when I went there a couple of years ago with my ex-partner, we got caught in a typhoon, okay, and we were stuck at Shanghai Hongqiao Airport, I think, and the rain was battering down. All of our flights were cancelled. We were probably delayed for about 24 hours, like in the airport. I was on the verge of tears, and like my ex didn't know a word of Chinese. I was like managing to communicate, and they were just like looking at me like, how on earth can you speak Chinese? They were just looking at me as if like, some people were amazed. But that's the thing, like that's an experience that like you come out of, you look back, and at the time you're like, oh my God, this is crazy. But you look back on, you're like, wow, that was a really good problem solving experience. And I used my Chinese language skills, even not being part of the scholarship, not at that time. This was 4 years later. Knowing that like you can still speak it, and knowing that you can get yourself out of situations, and knowing you can talk about it in a job interview. So that was really good. And I think, yeah, in my Deloitte interview, I'm trying to think of sort of the questions where I used China. Like, they like things like that. It makes you stand out. And also, if you have someone on your panel who's Chinese, that's something. On my assessment center table, so you have to do an interview, sometimes you have to do like an assessment center group task. There was a Chinese girl. She's like one of the most lovely girls I know. And she was getting sort of drowned out by other people, because again, as I was saying, these jobs are competitive. Sometimes people will go full force to get these jobs, and she was getting drowned out. And I was like, oh, where are you from in China? And then we started speaking, and then in the group task we were sort of working together as a team, and I was like, oh, what do you have to say to that? And she's like, oh, I had this to say. And like, I think if you work together with people, especially if you find a common ground, and a lot of the time that is languages. Even if you have a Spanish friend and you're like, hola, ¿cómo estás? Or a Chinese friend, like, oh, do kuima. Like, these things, like just having those small bits of conversation is so important. And then I suppose just talking about working for Deloitte. So Deloitte is a huge company. There's so much opportunity within Deloitte. Like, I think it's pretty much in most countries in the world. And you have opportunities to travel, you have opportunities to do, like, learn languages, speak languages, go and live abroad. And I think that's something that I will be doing in the future. Obviously, given the situation that we are living in, it's a little bit difficult, but I know in the future things will change. And I think, especially with the situation at the moment, like, my word of advice is don't let it, pardon me, don't let it scare you, don't let it put you off, because ultimately things will be good, things will be okay, and things will get back to normal. Currently, I mean, I've been working from home for 6 months, and I suppose in some ways that has had an impact on my graduate scheme, because I've not been able to socialise, I've not been able to go to the office and get that sort of experience. However, as long as you look forward and know that you're going to be learning things, then it's all good. And yeah, one thing that I can't emphasize enough as well when it comes to working, especially when you're finishing university, is building your network is such an important thing. Even if it's how many CISS scholars are there? There's probably over 100 of us now. It started as only 12 of us, and now there's a huge amount of us. Building your network is so important. Like, I mean, out of the 12 of us, like, I mean, Connor and Natalie, there's another 9 of us from 2014. Like, I don't speak to them every day. I probably don't speak to most of them even on a monthly basis, but I know that they're still like my family. They're still my brothers and sisters. I mean, we fairly acted like it when we lived there. Like, we loved each other sometimes, we hated each other sometimes, but that's the thing. We're definitely very much a family. And I know if I was interested in what Connor was talking about with data, because I mean, I love that sort of stuff, I could talk to Connor about it, and we could probably link people up and build our networks further, pardon me. Or Tanya, who's another girl who did the scholarship with, she currently like works as has an amazing life, and she's like freelancing and living in China and doing all these amazing things. And I know the older we get, we can reach out to each other, and I think that's something that we can be doing now across years. So, for example, if anybody in the last intake or in the next intake of scholars would ever want to reach out to me about job experience or how to do this in an interview or how to like use their language skills in this circumstance, like, I mean, by all means, you're more than welcome to talk to me, because we are part of a wider network, just like you would be when you work in a company. So I am very aware of time, and I think it's really important that we're interactive and have a good Q&A session. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sort of wrap it up. And I just want to say that this scholarship, what it's done to my life has changed it completely, because hadn't it been for that, I probably would, pardon me, I've got a bit of a cold. Hopefully it's nothing more. Like, what it's done is it's opened up so many doors, and sometimes you're not even aware of the doors that it's opened up. It's given you it's given me confidence, it's given me language skills, it's given me problem solving skills, and it's something that I can't emphasize like my thankfulness for. Like, as Fiona Fisher said, it's life changing, and I remember even when she said that at the beginning, I was like, probably not. As a stroppy 18-year-old, it's probably not life changing. Seriously, it is life changing, and if you have the chance to apply, or if you've already been on it, great. But if you're going to apply, really take it as an opportunity, and also never let an opportunity pass you by. I'm going to pass you on to Claire now before I have a coughing fit.
Thank you very much, Cameron. Hope you get some water. I'm now just going to pass on to Natalie, who's going to wrap up before we do a Q&A session.
Hello, can we all hear me? Chill. Okay, let me just pop on my wee slideshow. Okay, I won't talk too much, but I'm basically just running through my experience, my work experience post Tianjin. I, like Cameron and Connor, as he said, I'm also a 2014-2015 scholar, so it's been a hot minute since Tianjin. Okay, so post-scholarship, I went straight into higher education. I just finished my undergrad in Chinese studies at the University of Edinburgh. I'm currently taking a year out just to chill from academia, but saving towards doing a master's in translation and interpreting. Now, even though my interests lie in continuing with Mandarin, the jobs that I've done 15 jobs in my life, and the majority of them aren't completely to do with Mandarin. So just because I'm wanting to continue with Mandarin doesn't necessarily mean that what I've experienced and what I'm going to talk about is irrelevant to those of you who also don't want to continue with Mandarin. So consistently throughout university, I have consistently worked part-time, full-time, and had temp jobs. And having the scholarship was a huge plus on all of my applications, and I think helped me getting the majority of the jobs I got, especially in Edinburgh. So Chinese tourism is huge, as Connor touched on, in particular with Edinburgh. So there are lots of opportunities for speaking practice, When in interviews, I would always try and drop in my awareness of the Edinburgh China Ready campaign from the Edinburgh Tourism Action Group. So they are a group which are trying to help businesses around Scotland become China ready, from marketing to just how they sell and how they approach. So being able to drop that, I know that in any interview definitely piqued their interest. So if you're interested in any part-time job, I would suggest just Googling Edinburgh China Ready, and you can find the booklet and do your research that way. But beyond actually having the skill of speaking Mandarin, I found that I was able to rely on soft skills that I gained from the scholarship. So resilience, having a go-getter attitude, your interpersonal skills. The others touched on other skills such as problem solving and your cultural insight. These are things definitely to really emphasize that it's not just the language, it's the culture, it's the people, it's all of those aspects that make you very employable, whether it's just a part-time job or if it's a job that you're seriously wanting to follow for the rest of your career. In terms of Chinese specific related opportunities, I'm just going to mention very quickly. Of course, there's the CISS Alumni who've organised this wonderful event. They do a lot of great stuff, and I've loved seeing how the community is getting bigger and bigger, and they're very, very active. So if you're wanting to do something that's a bit more extracurricular, but still involved with Chinese and your time in Tianjin, definitely stay in contact with Claire and the rest of them. Last year, I was a judge. I was on the judging panel for the British Council Mandarin speaking competition. So that was amazing because I was able to not only just speak Mandarin, but as the other two touched on before, but increase my network. So I was able to meet the other judges and meet more people in the area that I'm interested in. And as well, just seeing pupils from around Scotland on their journey with Mandarin was also very inspiring. And it reminded me of the early days in Tianjin when I knew nothing. And these kids are 15 years old and spoke better Mandarin than I did at 18. So that was very fun. And these kind of opportunities through CISS will come up. These unique opportunities will come up, and it's definitely something to keep an eye out, these one-off opportunities. I've written down the language show Scotland with a question mark because this is something that I took part in twice, but when I looked up when the next one's going to be, I don't know if they're continuing it in Glasgow. I think it's just in London. So the language show is basically an exhibition that promotes language learning. So I'm not sure if it's going to happen again in Glasgow, but if it does, I volunteered for Skill and CISS to promote the scholarship and learning Mandarin, and that was very fun as well. And also I got to meet people who were interpreters for the EU, and that was super interesting and also kind of piqued my interest to leading to me where I want to go now. I've also written down teaching Mandarin in Scottish schools. So this isn't something I've personally done, but some other alumni have through various societies at university. If you're interested in becoming a teacher, whether it's teaching Mandarin or not, this might be something that's a good way to have your foot in the door in that kind of area. I just thought it was worthwhile writing down. It's definitely an option. They mainly get native Chinese speakers, but now there's us basically coming in with a decent level of Chinese. We're definitely capable of teaching basic Chinese to the pupils around Scotland. And I'm sure for those of you who tuned in last week, Leah must have spoke about the Chinese Bridge competition. This is again a great opportunity, and potential free trip to China comes out of it. So definitely recommend that if anyone wants to give that a go. Okay, so in the last few years, I've had 2 big internships that I'm going to talk a little bit about. I'm not going to talk about the specifics of the company, just more about my experience in general and how I ended up getting these experiences. So my first internship was 5 months, and that was part of the bookings and marketing team in the company's Qingdao branch. Qingdao is on the east coast between Beijing and Shanghai. And you might have heard of Qingdao beer. I'm not sure, you might have seen them in the shops, but that's where that beer is from. Side note, if you're in China again, definitely go to Qingdao. It is top 3, one of my favorite places in China. I love it so much. And if you ever need any recommendations, get in touch because I know all the best restaurants. But in this internship, besides just eating all amazing good food, I had many different jobs, one of which was event management. So I organised a language exchange event, which isn't actually connected to the company or what the company does at all, but the company was super excited and wanted to support me create this event. So I learned a lot in creating that exchange event, because there's, surprise, a lot more work than you think. You need to like get the place and do marketing, and it's, yeah, but that was, I learned a lot from that. I also did social media marketing for the company. I learned a lot about Chinese business. This was a big one. So I would go to the meetings with our Chinese partners. My brand, I would more audit than really be an active member. I would just kind of take notes and say the odd thing, but I learned a lot about the little things that you don't even really know about Chinese business, with the business cards or just special Chinese business etiquette. I learned a lot from that. I also had a lot of admin to do. That's just kind of what you do with internships. You have a lot of admin to do. They give you, so that's just part of the job. But how did I find this internship? So I'm sure whatever university you go to or college will have some sort of go abroad or careers fair. So I went one year, and I really encourage that if you go to any of those fairs, don't just sort of passively meander through, take a few leaflets and go. Really make an effort to go up to the people at the stalls, introduce yourself, find more about what the company does, and also sell yourself what you can do for the company if you're interested. So I went up to this company's stall, and I introduced myself to the person at the stall, who ended up being the managing director. And through speaking to him and him finding out about my experience in China, he suggested that instead of going for their regular position, that I apply for an internal position that isn't regularly advertised. So thanks to that interaction and that little bit of networking and going out my way and feeling a bit nervous and uncomfortable for a second, made a big difference. So when it came to the interviewing stage, I was able to drop his name and talk about that interaction. And I feel like that definitely helped me get the job, because they had already had that face-to-face interaction with me. Okay, so my second internship was with the same company. They invited me back for the following summer. So this internship was just 2 months, but it was a very busy 2 months. I was promoted to operations manager, so a lot more responsibility. I was doing a lot of the same jobs in terms of event management and just general admin, but on top of that, I had more kind of serious responsibilities, and I had to deal with things such as conflict management between our participants, between our Chinese partners. Our branch manager was sick a lot of the summer, so I had to step in and kind of be essentially the branch manager, which was very intimidating but very rewarding. Also, I had a lot of those meetings that I spoke about before, where I sort of audited the business meetings. This time I was trusted to have one-on-one meetings, which was huge, and again, very rewarding to leave these meetings having conducted them completely in Mandarin and be able to leave feeling like I got a lot from it, and it was just a great feeling. And finally, my other job was to coordinate and delegate tasks around the office, which was hard for me because I feel like I'm quite, not shy, but I definitely don't like to step on toes. So to have to be in the position where I'm telling someone to do something definitely took me out of my comfort zone, but it, again, was super rewarding, and I learned a lot from both of my internships. Okay. So yeah, cliches just from my general working life. These are all things you've definitely heard, but they ring very true for me. And I should also note that in fourth year, so the year just there, I continued to be a brand ambassador for the company I interned with. And my main job for that was to represent the company at career fairs, which was a weird 360 situation, and also do a lot of Skype interviews for participants. So I know what is a good CV and a bad CV, and a good application and a bad application. So these are just some pointers that might be useful to some of you who are entering the job market or just looking, even just for part-time jobs. This is very relevant. Never be afraid or embarrassed to sell yourself. Big struggle for me. I've always hated bigging myself up, but you just have to push through it, and you have to talk as if you are the best person for the job, and that's just what you're going to have to do. But it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's what employers are looking for. They want someone who's confident and feels like they can really take on the job. And if you don't act like it, you're not going to get the job. Do thorough research before the job interview, and show enthusiasm. Those two kind of go hand in hand. The amount of interviews I've conducted where they have done zero research at all into the position, or you can hear how bored they are on the phone. I'm like, why are you here? Why am I here? This is just the worst. Versus someone who has really done their research, knows everything about it, and yeah, it just makes a huge, huge difference. And this one is very important. Take the time to create a good CV. I have seen so many bad CVs in my life. Not asking for some sort of feat of graphic design. It doesn't have to be the most beautiful CV in the world. It just has to be grammatically correct, decent formatting, and to the point. Another thing, if you've been on the scholarship, that should absolutely be on your CV. That is a huge, huge thing to be a recipient of the scholarship, and that should definitely be on your CV. And finally, to echo what Connor and Cameron said, utilize your network. As Connor said, we kind of got our FCO job through networking in Tianjin and through meeting different people. And the job I have now, I've been able to get that job through networking and through meeting different people. While of course it's so important to develop your skills to be the best employee, it's also so important that you do push yourself and meet people and grow this network. And as Cameron said, the Alumni is an amazing place to start. We're all going to go in so many different directions and have different skills that we can all learn from, but absolutely it's a great pool of people to kind of jump off of if you're looking to get into different areas. But yeah, that was it. If anyone has any questions about Edinburgh Uni or any of my internships or just anything, just want to chat, feel free to email me. I am super chatty, if you couldn't tell. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalie. So thank you to all three of our speakers. That was very insightful. And hopefully everyone got a lot out of that, which I'm sure they did. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions. We have slightly run over, but it's okay. I'll just ask a few that any of you can jump in on if you feel like you've got anything to add. First question was, has appreciation of cultural differences between countries helped you in any of your jobs?
Can I answer that? Certainly. Because the thing is, like, okay, the Chinese saying "diu mianzi," I mean, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I've used this phrase, is to lose face. And I think that's one thing. It's like, you need to be aware of how other people feel, how other people perceive things, because even the way, right, one example, I'm going to keep it concise, but one example is, as an English speaker, okay, you would never go into a restaurant and say, I want the chicken, okay, because that would be deemed as impolite. You would say, I would like the chicken. But if you're, as an Italian speaker, you would never go into a restaurant and say, vorrei il pollo. I mean, that's what we would get taught as English speakers to say, is vorrei, which means I would want, but that sounds weird. You would just say, I want. So it is important, being aware of cultures, even from a personal perspective, you understand why some people might speak to you the way they speak to you. And I think that's something that's really important when building your network, and being understanding of the way they speak to you might not be offensive, and the way that you speak to someone might not be offensive. And by treating people equally and fairly, that's a really important thing. But knowing a language does help you understand how people think. And if anybody's interested, I've got a really good TED talk that I could send to you about it.
Yeah, does anyone else have anything to add?
I'd say definitely. It pretty much has helped in every single job where there are Chinese people, which in Edinburgh is inevitable. There's always going to be a Chinese customers. But even in terms of the internships that I did, the main point of the company was to bring British students to China, which was kind of strange, especially having been a Tianjin scholar and kind of gone through the same thing to have to explain to these British kids like what is going on and why these Chinese people are doing these things, and explaining to them how it's not rude, it's just a part of culture, and seeing their eyes become open to this whole new culture as opposed to just assuming that that's rude and writing them off or writing off a whole culture. It's really cool to be this sort of interculture like bridge between the two, as Connor said, steal what Connor said. Yeah, absolutely. It's not just about the language, it's about everything in between.
I've got nothing else to add, really. I mean, they both covered it superbly. So.
The next question is, what piece of advice any of you would give to a new scholar just about to start?
I'll take this one if you want. Don't be afraid to put yourself in situations where you might muck up completely. I know that sounds really bad and it might terrify you, but the biggest language learning lessons and something that fine-tuned my vocabulary and fine-tuned how I spoke to people and grammar were made out of me making a complete fool of myself, normally in front of lots of people, and I never made that mistake ever again. So I mean, I think the Natalie and Cameron will both agree with me that the sort of high pressure scenarios that come with, you know, if you're living in another country and, you know, like trying to find your way, the high pressure scenarios really help mold you into a good language speaker. So that's my main bit of advice is don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Also, to add to that, take it easy, because like the thing is, if you're going to go in all guns blazing at first, like you're going to, it's already an intense atmosphere. Okay, like I mean, you're 18 years old. Okay, like you think you know the world, but you don't. Like trust me, I'm 24 years old and I still do not know the world. And I remember looking back to when I was 18, thinking that I knew it all, thinking that I was the wisest person in the world. You're not. Like take it easy, go. As Connor said, don't be afraid to muck up in a situation, because it happens, and that's something even that you can take on into business. Like I've been in meetings where you might answer a question wrongly, and that's in front of a client, and that's a big deal. Like, and don't be afraid to make a mistake. Don't be afraid, and don't beat yourself up about it either. Just take it easy, and yeah, take it as it goes, and you will have an amazing time. But yeah, and just I think yeah, just write. What I say is just ride the sort of wave, and you'll have an amazing time.
Yeah. Finally, I would just say that of course Mandarin and learning Mandarin is so important, but it is not the sole purpose of the scholarship. If they wanted you to just learn Mandarin, they'd bring a fabulous Chinese teacher over to Scotland and would have you learn Mandarin intensely for a year. It's so much more about just being in China and soaking up everything and learning all these soft skills that we spoke about, you know, problem solving, things like that, and just learning Chinese culture, visiting China and around all the cities and eating all the food. It's as much about that as it is about the language. So just be prepared to just give everything a go, and don't just be a nerd and study. And that's real. You should definitely learn the language. Going to class is super important, but it's also as much about everything else.
But that's another thing to add quickly. It's just like you're going out with, what is it, 21 now people, 21 others, 22 people. Like you're going, and like even the 12 of us, we all had very different personalities, and that's one thing. You learn how to deal with different types of personalities. Even maybe at the time you might not think it, but in the future you realize like, oh my god, I learned so much. Oh my god, like this is how you do it. This is how you like work with other people. And I think yeah, essentially the 12 of us or the 22 of you or however many it is now are a team, and that's what it's about. It teaches you how to work as a team, and that is one of the most important things, especially as well going into a job.
Yeah, I think we'll probably have time for one more question. I know, Connor, you studied 2 languages at university, and as did Cameron for a bit. Is there any tips for studying 2 languages at university?
I'm absolutely sprinting to try and reply to them all in
That's
text.
all right.
So if you do have any questions and we go over time, feel free to send me them, and I'm sure the other 2 will answer as well. The tips for studying languages at university: it is hard. is the only thing that I can say is extremely difficult, and you're doing a really tough challenge. But I suppose the tips that kind of kept me sane was make sure that you're not immediately going from one language to the next. Make sure you have a break in between, because like Cameron was saying earlier, it gets really difficult when there's a linguistic phenomenon called code switching, where you do start speaking one language in the wrong class, and it gets all very hectic. So just schedule your time in properly. I wouldn't say do it day by day, but for me anyway, what worked was doing a solid bit of studying in one of the language, being able to kind of compartmentalize that bit of studying, have a wee break, and then you could start fresh in the other one. That's probably the best bit of advice, but I'd happily chat to you more about it, because it's something I'm still trying to cope with.
Outside of uni as well, just to echo that from Connor, outside of uni, even not studying a language as part of my degree, like currently I want to move to Amsterdam next year, so I'm trying to learn Dutch, but I also try to keep my Spanish going. And I think that's something, as Connor said, good time management is vital. Like if you're going to be reading one sentence in Italian and the next sentence in Mandarin, like that's not going to help you learn. It's time boxing it. Spend an hour learning Italian grammar, okay? Then I'd say at least an hour break. Empty your mind of anything to do with that language, okay? And then do the next language. Take another time break. And I mean, just learning about the culture, depending on what language you're learning, because I mean, certain cultures are similar, but I wouldn't recommend learning two languages that are too similar at the same time, like Italian and Spanish, okay? Because in your head, you forget which one's which. Whereas if you're learning Chinese and Russian, I mean, I don't have any experience learning Russian, but at least they're two different alphabets. I mean, Wojadao doesn't sound anything like Yaznayu, and it's which means that means I know, by the way. And those are two things that you can split. Make sure they're split up, and make sure you're probably doing something that's slightly different. Even if you're learning, I don't know, Russian versus French, they're slightly different, or they're quite different. But or if you want to learn two Romance languages, don't do Spanish Portuguese or Spanish Italian. Do something like French and Portuguese, or Spanish and Romanian, because you need to do something that's a bit differentiated. Otherwise, it gets crazy. But you can learn them one after the other, if that helps.
Yeah, I've been given the go-ahead that we can do a couple more questions if our speaker is okay. If our speakers are okay with that. There was a really interesting one, whether you have any networking tips and how do you start talking to the relevant people?
I can go with that one. Natalie, do you want to go?
I would just go out. Go to the events. There are so many events in Edinburgh if you're in Edinburgh, and also in Glasgow. As intimidating as it can seem, you might think, oh, I'm just a student. These businessmen or whatever don't want to speak to me, but they'll really respect you for going out your way and, going up and introducing yourself to them. Just go for it. It's kind of vague, but for me, the hardest bit was just telling myself that, okay, you're not just a student. You can go and do this. These events are there for you to go for a reason, and you're not totally unwanted there. And and follow up. If you meet someone, follow up with them. If they give you your business card, follow up with them. Don't just do nothing about it until years later and drop it in their emails hi, remember me from that one event 2 years ago? Can we go out for coffee and talk about this thing? Definitely show that you're enthusiastic and you're keen, and follow up with them. That's what I would say.
Some advice I think you're completely right, Natalie. I think from my job literally is to network. And what I would say is email people. Don't be scared to email people. Just be if you find an email of someone who you're interested in speaking to, okay, if you find their LinkedIn, go in their inbox and be hi, can we go for a coffee? And even if you think they're not going to answer, be it's on me. Hi, can I have 5 minutes of your time for a phone call. I'm really interested in this. Introduce yourself, show enthusiasm, okay? Like, don't just, but take initiative, because the thing is, you could email someone and be like, hi, can we meet up for a coffee? I'd be like, why? Okay, like, be like, hi, I'm really interested in this. This is the experience I've got. I believe that I can do this. I am going to be an amazing asset. If you want an internship, I'm going to be an amazing asset because of this. And even if those things aren't that significant, even in your head, big them up. Like, because trust me, people love it. Like, and you don't know any opportunity that can pass the corner. I wanted to go into a new project and work, okay? And to get onto projects and work, you have to talk to people, okay? Otherwise, you're what they call on the bench. And if you're on the bench, that doesn't look good for promotions. So you talk to people, and like, even being, you don't even, so say at university, okay, like you're in a society, like me, I'm very into LGBT stuff. Like, being part of those things, that also expands your network. Being part of CISS. If you come to me, for example, and be like, oh, Cam, do you know someone who can help me with something that I'm interested in? I don't know, like, say you're interested in Java. I could be like, well, yeah, number one, I might be able to help you. Number two, I might know someone who I can give you an email address or give a LinkedIn, and then you can connect with them and be like, oh, by the way, I was speaking to Cameron and he said, talk to you. Like, that's the thing, like, it's a massive chain. Like, and seriously, utilize your network, because that is what gets you places. Like, being in the LGBT society at work got me onto the project that I'm on now, and I was so interested in being that project, and there would have been no way of getting into it if I hadn't even just had a conversation with someone who I knew through that. So yeah, just don't be afraid to talk to people, but also, if you're going to talk to them, have some substance behind it, because if you're just going to be like, hi, can we meet up for a coffee, it's like, why? So have a good case behind you, and I'm sure you're all doing amazing.
Yeah, that's great. I think we have time for one more question. And someone was wondering whether your employers cared about the specific HSK qualification, or whether it was just your general Mandarin ability.
Sorry, Natalie, go on.
No, it's your turn. It's your turn.
Okay. Well, interesting sort of bit about when I went for the job at Burberry was that I went in there and I said, "Oh, I can speak Chinese. You know, I've went and lived in China. It was on my CV." And they said, "Prove it." And then I was taken out to the shop floor and I spoke Chinese to a customer. Not as a representative of Burberry, but, you know, just to strike up a conversation. And then they were kind of like, yeah. I think HSK is quite important if you want to work in China. I think quite a lot of employers, and Natalie will know this a lot better than I do, but from what I've gathered, it seems to be a qualification that seems to be more tailored to, you know, working specifically in China, whether it's for a multinational or whether it's for a specifically Chinese company that's more Chinese business to business than anything else. But Natalie will know way more about that than I do.
Yeah, HSK, for me, I would only worry about HSK if you want to go to university in China, not as part of your year abroad, but more as like for your postgrad or something like that. You need to achieve a HSK 5 or HSK 4, depending on the degree. But in terms of employers here in Scotland, they won't really know what HSK 5 is. You're lucky if they'll even know the different like Delhi qualifications like A1, A2, B1, B2. So really it won't matter. If you just say advanced or intermediate, they'll understand. So I wouldn't worry about the specifics of HSK unless you're wanting to work in China or apply for a Chinese university.
Yeah, I agree as well. I think actions speak louder than words in that sense. Or like bits on paper, like, by all means, go to China and do your HSK exam, because it's really good if you want to apply to go to university in China or work in China. But I don't think you can go and say to an employer, right, in your CV, you can say that you got an exam, but you might need to explain what the HSK exam is. One piece of advice: compare it to the Cambridge English test, because that's what it is. It's like the Chinese version. But yeah, the most important thing, as Connor did, you have to prove it. Like, I mean, even if it's like, oh, prove how you do it. write their, say what's your name, and then write their Chinese name. I mean, you can literally use the simplest characters to do it. Like literally, I mean, it's fine. But yeah, I think it's important, but it's not crucial to like get a job, especially in the UK.
Well, yeah, great. Yeah, that's all the questions we have time for, and we're a little bit over, sorry, but I didn't really want to stop it. There was a lot of good advice and tips coming out. Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen. But yeah, overall, thank you so much to everyone who tuned in. Thanks for joining and asking questions. Again, thank you to the speakers. That was a really, really good. Sorry you've had to speak for so long, but yeah, that was really good, really insightful. Yeah, if you would like to become a CISS scholar or just learn a little bit more about the scholarship, on the screen now are some of the social media accounts and the email for CISS, who can answer more questions on the scholarship. If you want to go on their webpage, I think there's also a section on the CISS Alumni as well, if you'd like to learn a bit more about us. To alumni, if you want to get a little bit more involved in the CISS Alumni group, our subcommittees are always looking for more help with organising, as Natalie said, with organising projects and events. There's going to be a lot more. We're going to take quite a focus on networking. We'll try and get a few more networking events, as networking is so important, as was said. But yeah, thank you again. That was great. To our speakers, thanks.
Thanks very much, Claire.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, guys. And yeah, if you have anything you need, just connect on LinkedIn and I'll accept. Right. It's lovely seeing you all.
Thanks.
See you later.